Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society webinar series. My name is Courtney McWhirter. I will be your host for today. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at Digital Enterprise Society. If you have any questions about membership or getting involved, please feel free to contact me. Digital Enterprise Society is a new nonprofit member association organized to enable the transformation of product development, design, delivery, and maintenance throughout the digital enterprise, regardless of software tools used. We are dedicated to the transformation of the manufacturing enterprise workforce. We'd like to invite you all to join Digital Enterprise Society. The society was formed by a PLM World Transitional Board of Directors. As part of the transition, past PLM World members have been granted free Digital Enterprise Society membership. If you had a login for the PLM World website or attended a PLM World event, including Siemens PLM Connections or regional user groups events, your free membership is waiting. If you have questions about accessing your membership, please feel free to contact me. If you're new to the Digital Enterprise Society, we invite you to join using the promo code webinar09 listed at the bottom of the screen there. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Lisa July, VP of Digital Intelligence at J2E Technology. Lisa brings over 20 years of experience in information technology positions across both commercial and government environments. She specializes in data management, process implementation, curriculum development, and training delivery. With certifications from the U.S. Navy and IPX Institute of Process Excellence, Lisa is uniquely qualified to provide implementation assistance, training, and ongoing support to clients no matter of their skill level. Before we get started, Lisa and I would like to invite you to ask, to share any questions that you have or throughout the presentation in either the chat box or the questions box. I will keep an eye on those and we'll have a brief Q&A following the presentation. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Can you still see my stuff?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Did that change now?
Yep, and the slides are advancing.
Good. Thank you. All right. So this is a
You
list of
betcha.
subjects I will present today. Please save any questions you have until the end. We should have about 10 minutes for a question and answer session. I was a U.S. Navy data systems technician where I learned to maintain and repair hardware. I later obtained my bachelor's degree in information technology, worked for both the U.S. government and various commercial companies, where I learned many of the configuration management procedures I use today. I was also trained as an instructor, and I currently provide custom curriculum and instructor-led training to our customers. This, along with my CM and DM duties, keeps me very busy. The reason we are here today is to discuss the baseline procedure we teach our U.S. Navy customers. This procedure came about largely because our customers needed to produce baselines but were mostly unsuccessful. The biggest problem to overcome was the fact that there were directives to produce these baselines, but no clear procedures to follow. Our sponsor hired us to produce CM procedures in a guidebook format as an initiative effort that lasted a year. After that year, the customer decided to adopt the guidebook and offered it packaged as a service. The rest, as they say, is history. These are our learning objectives. If, as we said before, at the end of the session, anyone has questions, I will be happy to address them at that time, as time allows. Okay, so to produce a baseline, you have to understand that it is the configuration of a product at a specific point in its life cycle. This snapshot lists or otherwise identifies the data associated with the product at that time. There can be multiple baselines generated at each product phase, and they can be used to trace all product changes. Once a baseline is ready for use, it is released and frozen against changes. Any modifications that occur to the product after that point should be rolled into the next baseline. Here's a scenario we use during customer training sessions to make this point. Suppose you have a friend that comes to visit you in September. You take a picture of him and you put it on your refrigerator. In this picture, he is clean shaven, looking pretty good, by the way. Fast forward to December, and he comes back to visit, only this time, he's grown a full beard, looking kind of like Grizzly Adams. What do you do to document this change? Do you take a marker and draw a beard on the first picture? Or do you take another picture? This is Baseline 101. You need both pictures to keep track of the changes that occur. Otherwise, you lose traceability if you modify your only record. To compile this list of standard baselines, we used both government and commercial standards. Functional baselines are established at the beginning of a product's life cycle and mainly focus on documentation about the product. You can see some artifact examples on this slide. Allocated baselines use the approved functional baseline as its foundation and consist of data derived from additional requirements or constraints. At this point, you know a little more about your product, maybe even have some ideas of hardware and/or software needed to produce your product. Smaller projects may not formally release an allocated baseline, and larger projects may generate an allocated baseline for each of its subsystems with a top-level baseline that merges all of those subsystems. Projects who use developmental baselines normally generate several during the stage where development, integration, and testing occurs. Using the last approved baseline, which could be the functional or allocated baseline, as a foundation, the developmental baseline begins to flesh out the in-work product solution. Initial product baselines define the build to or code to configuration for hardware and software, respectively. This baseline is established at the end of the development, integration, and testing phase and includes all product descriptions, such as specifications, design information, and any required procedures or manuals. Verification for this baseline occurs at the end of the Functional Configuration Audit, or FCA, which is the formal examination and acceptance that the product meets its intended functional requirements. I went too far, sorry. The product baseline defines the production configuration of your product. Everything needed for manufacture and deployment is included in this baseline. This is verified at the end of the Physical Configuration Audit, or PCA, which is the formal examination and acceptance that the product meets its intended design requirements. This baseline is also the configuration used to derive product verification tests, and its foundation is the approved initial product baseline. The as-installed baseline is the configuration generated when the product is deployed to a specific site or location. This baseline's foundation is the approved product baseline, and it contains all information specific to the destination site or location. This includes specific serial numbers for parts, licenses for software, and any alterations documented during installation. The as-installed baseline is a living configuration as it documents any changes to the installed product, such as new serial numbers when parts are replaced during maintenance. All documented changes or updates that occur with the as-installed baseline need to be communicated back to the product CM team so that any changes that require modification to the design can be properly processed. All right, Courtney, if you can let them have the poll, please.
Will do. Queuing it up right now. One moment. All right, if you could all, we have a question, a quick poll here for you. Which of the following do you have in your current product configuration? An approved and released baseline, a baseline in review, or no baseline at all? If you could please go ahead and cast your votes, that would be appreciated. Well, it looks like we have around half of you voted so far. 59, 60% of you have an approved and released baseline, with 17% saying no baseline at all. We're about 78% of the vote. Leave it just a few more minutes. We've got 80% of you have voted so far. Anyone else that would like to go ahead and put your vote in, or go ahead and do so now. 64% have said that they have an approved and released baseline. 17% still saying no baseline at all. We'll give it one more second, and then we'll go ahead and close that poll.
All righty then.
Looks like we're going to close with 64% approved and 17% none at all, and 19% a baseline in review.
That's actually better than I expected. That's pretty good. All right, so to continue, we're going to talk about the baseline procedure that we instruct our clients to use. I'll show you the elements of establishing a baseline as well as the data that defines each activity. The entry conditions for each baseline are similar, as well as the participants and what they need to accomplish. On the next slide, we will show the procedure map that identifies the necessary criteria, roles, and activities. Then we'll discuss each activity by name and include the inputs, instructions, and outputs defined for each activity. All right, this is the activity map for the established baseline procedure. As you can see, the graphic along the left side, the procedure participants are listed, including the CM system and required business processes. Next, you'll see the activities that need to be accomplished during the procedure. Notice the activities are performed in a specific order and by specific participants. The upper sections identify the inputs and outputs to the procedure. The CM system provides the procedure entrance criteria, which includes the product schedule, CM plan, and the configuration item listing, all of which are generated through other procedures in the guidebook created for our sponsor. Baseline procedure activity 1. To begin this procedure, activity 1 determines which baseline to establish and define its entry criteria. This is done through communications between the CM and project managers using the schedule, the CM plan, and baseline definition and criteria documents, as well as the previously approved baseline, if it exists. The CM and PM will use these inputs to determine the next baseline. They will then produce the notification to the stakeholders that this procedure has begun. Also, each baseline needs to go through 2 additional CM procedures. The first is the configuration identification procedure, which is used to ascertain the CIs, configuration items, that will be part of the new baseline. The second is configuration control, used to ensure all new or revised items needed for the baseline are properly released. Maybe sometime in the future, our office will be asked to return to this webinar and give you information on those other procedures. Activity 2 occurs after configuration identification has been completed and configuration control nears completion. This activity needs that approved CI list from configuration identification and the hierarchy as well, along with the released items from the configuration control procedure as inputs. The CM manager works with the change owners as necessary to ensure the preliminary baseline includes all items that are approved for inclusion during configuration identification. So basically, this means that once you have identified all of your CIs and they have been properly vetted and approved, any changes that you need to your product structure have to be managed and released prior to generating this preliminary baseline report. This report and all released CIs and associated control items must be in the CM system prior to the next activity. Activity 3 verifies the preliminary baseline report. Outputs from Activity 2 are the inputs to Activity 3. The verification team reviews all available data and delivers their finding in a project-authorized format based on the type of baseline that's being established. Activity 4 is required only if discrepancies are identified by the verification team. Any discrepancies found, such as items that don't meet the requirements or artifacts that are missing or incomplete, they need to be corrected by the project team. The CM manager ensures the proper tasks are created and assigned to applicable team members. Once the resolutions are in place, the CM manager will produce an updated report. Activity 5, that involves a baseline review. All artifacts produced so far in the procedure are provided as inputs to this activity. The Configuration Control Board, or CCB, receives the inputs and votes on the package. Depending on that vote, the package can be approved so that it will later on be finalized. It can be sent back for additional rework, or it can be deferred based on some criteria determined by the CCB. If the baseline is deferred, the CM manager will need to ensure all changes associated to this baseline are properly managed. This might mean some items will need to revert to their previous revision, or an update is made to an item's effective date. And Activity 6. This delivers the approved baseline. All items associated to the approved baseline are in the CM system, and the CM manager ensures all applicable recipients are notified. This could mean that it is made available in the CM system or delivered to the recipients via other means. All delivery requirements must be observed during this activity. Receipt of delivery should be documented and uploaded or otherwise marked in the CM system. Also, this particular activity will highlight the end of the configuration control procedure, as all of the changes that were used to affect this new baseline will need to be closed and finalized in a closed loop change process. All right, next we have a slide that shows a sample baseline report derived from the IPX standard format. Your baseline report may look differently if your project defines additional or different criteria. Notice that the configuration items are in the left section, which also identifies the product hierarchy and each CI's quantity in the product. The middle section shows each CI's associated controlled item or items. Included are released and effective dates, which could be different. And the right section documents the change paper that released each CI. I know this was supposed to go an hour, but I'm pretty much done now unless there are a lot of questions. Thank you for your attention. Courtney?
Thank you, Lisa. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the question field, and I will. I'll feed those over to Lisa to get them answered for you. So if we have any questions, I'll go ahead and give you a few minutes. One question we did have come in, Lisa, is with the way programs are requiring more speed to their product release cycles, do you see this process fitting into the quick release scenarios?
Yes, I do, because you still need to track your baselines. You still have to manage your changes, and just because the speed increases doesn't mean that the rigor associated to what's going on with your change with your product needs to be pushed aside.
Michelle asked for us if we will be providing this document. We will have a recording of today's webinar that will be posted to the Digital Enterprise Society website. And then if Lisa's willing, we can make her slides available as well. Lisa, I'll leave that up to you.
Absolutely. I will send them to you after the session.
Okay. And we'll include a link to those on the website then as well with the recording. Another question we have, you stated that your current customer is the U.S. Navy. Do these same principles apply in the commercial world?
Yes, they do. I came from, most recently, the commercial environment, and we did these same things. We called them different names, but we still provided the same information. We still had to track our baselines as a commercial entity, just like the government, so that we know what we have, what changes, and we can keep that audit trail when we ourselves are being audited.
Thank you, Lisa. Anybody else has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the question field. We did have one just come through from Chris. Who generally decides whether an item is to be CI?
Well, the process for configuration identification is a team effort. It starts with the CM manager bringing the information to light and getting like a brainstorming session going on with the team. The team then goes through and asks a series of questions that identify whether it's a CI or not. Once that list of candidate CIs is generated, it's presented to the CCB and they make that final determination.
Thank you, Lisa. Keep those questions coming. We do have another one. Also, you stated that you should create a new baseline when the configuration changes, but how would you revise an existing baseline?
Well, the way that we instruct people to do that is it depends on your own procedures, but the standards that we follow is that you take the current and present baseline and you freeze it against changes, and then you create the new one while you go through and change your product. This way, the previous baseline stays static so that you can always go back and use it for comparison or an audit trace, whatever your project needs, and you're still using then you can go to the new baseline and utilize the changes that are happening in your product structure. And it all should be combined into your change process. I'm sorry, I had to swallow. Breathe and swallow.
No problem. Sorry to jump in. You ready for another one?
Sure.
Okay, we do have another question. What are the primary considerations for an item to be a CI?
Again, this is based on what you put in your configuration management plan, but as a standard practice, we advise people how much risk are you as a program or project willing to take if that item is not a CI? Is it expensive? Is it a long lead item? Does it affect your product as a whole? If somebody took that piece out of your product structure, would your product fail? These are some of the questions that you would ask yourself and as a team, and go through and identify those CIs accordingly.
Thank you, Lisa. One more we have here, and again, anybody in the audience, if you'd like to send us a question, please do so in that question field. What do you see as the difference between a functional and allocated baseline?
Well, to our company, The functional baseline is something that's set up to say, I know what my product should do. This is what I think we need to have happen. And it's all theory for the most part. A lot of documentation. You have your requirements. You have a basic specification. You might have some designed constraints, et cetera, those kind of things. And then once you move it to the allocated baseline, you have a little bit more information. Like you now may have an idea of what kind of hardware you might need to have, even though you don't have a specific model or serial number in mind at this point. You might have a few more constraints that have come through. You might have something that you have to do ahead of time in order to make your software development procedures go forward appropriately. So it just depends on, again, what you put in your CM plan, but it's usually something that you have something that you can put against your requirements to say this piece is going to do this function.
Thank you, Lisa. We have another question coming in through the questions box. Again, if you have any, go ahead and enter them there. As a general rule, do all hardware CI need to be provisioned?
If it's, in my opinion, if it's a CI, yes, you've identified it for some particular reason. So that means that it should be something that you have available to you so that you have your logistic support for it on the end when it's being deployed and maintained. Don't get me wrong that your whole product, your whole baseline will include your product structure, everything that's in it, but there are only certain items that will be identified as a CI. You need to meet that happy medium where you have just enough CIs that you have the logistic support later on in the product life cycle, but you don't want too much, or then you'll be wasting resources against something that you don't need that particular rigor against. One of the examples that we give in our training is that if you have a computer that has a screw that has to be hardened against how it's sets the server in the rack, that could be a CI. But if you have a monitor or a mouse that you can go and pick up at Best Buy, that's not so much something that you need under configuration control, because it can always be swapped out relatively easily, and it's not something that you need to go to the CCB to get replaced. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. We got a few more come in. They're rolling in now. Can you have multiple releases for one baseline type?
Oh, absolutely. Especially during the developmental baseline. This is where you're going through that quick cycle of generating software packages, and you can have a baseline, the developmental baseline for each module or the package as a whole, and it can just be cycling through until you actually get to the piece, the code to portion of your initial product baseline. So you can have multiple releases of the same baseline type. Again, that would be something that you would identify in your CM plan and document accordingly.
Another question we had was, what PLM software tools do you use?
Do I use currently? Okay, we have a couple. And in the past, I've used Team Center and Windchill. Presently, I'm using CM Pro, and we're investigating other CM tools at the moment. And we are about to set off on a prototype for another tool, starting in February, I believe.
A couple more questions. Do we separate HW from SW CIs?
We do, yes. If that's not something that you or that your project does, then that's again a decision that your project would have to make. The reason why we do that is because we have the hardware and the software, and it's a relationship, the software being installed on that hardware piece. So this way that we can separately track the licenses and return and issue them without having to modify the actual hardware piece, unless that hardware is going through a change of its own.
We have a comment from Chris. I always have a problem asking for a CI list from my CM managers. Why is that? CI list is required artifact during ILAs.
Chris, I've had that same question for 4 years. I don't, and I honestly, we get a plethora of answers. Usually the CM people that we associate with are given the CM manager tasking as a collateral duty, and we usually get, I haven't gotten to it yet. Those are the usual responses, and we've been trying to teach people that if you do your everyday job, that includes implementing CM. CM should be transparent to the people who are doing it, and the CM manager should just be facilitating the process as it goes along. So the data, if the design engineers, if the project manager, if the logistics people all do what they're supposed to be doing, then the artifacts that the CM manager needs to pull in all that information will be there.
Thank you, Lisa. I think if we don't have any other questions, I'll give you guys just a minute. I think we've addressed all of the questions that you've had thus far. You're quite welcome for all the responses, and thank you, Lisa, for taking some time to do such an in-depth Q&A session. So we really appreciate that. If we don't have any further questions, I will go ahead and begin to wrap us up for the day. I would like to let you know of a few other things we have coming up. Again, here is Lisa's contact information. You can get in touch with her via email, and we also included her LinkedIn here as well. So thank you again, Lisa. We really appreciate you joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Just want to make you aware, we do have in our webinar series coming up, Are You Ready for the Next Gen Engineer, presented by Matt Hang from Vertex Software. That will be taking place Tuesday, November 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern. I invite you all to tune into the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Lisa's colleague, Laura Hooker, co-owner of J2E Technology, will be a guest on an upcoming episode. Subscribe today on your favorite podcast streaming platforms and never miss an episode as they are released every Wednesday. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Again, my name is Courtney McWhirter. I am the Marketing Communications Manager here at Digital Enterprise Society. If you have any questions at all about your membership or getting involved with the organization, we'd be happy to have you, and I would love to answer any of those questions for you. And finally, we are Digital Enterprise Society. We are dedicated to the manufacturing enterprise workforce, and if you'd like to learn more, visit us at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Thank you all for joining us today. We really do appreciate it, and once again, a recording of this presentation will be available on our website shortly. Thank you. Have a great day.